Let's return to that top story this evening, shall we, folks? The Telegraph is reporting about this legal case that Sir Keir Starmer was apparently part of that then set the precedent to open the door to hundreds of British soldiers being pursued for alleged war crimes. Now, this is unearthed court documents now suggest the Prime Minister worked on a human rights claim in 2007, which led the Ministry of Defence to order fresh inquiries into deaths in Iraq. It triggered years of criminal investigations into soldiers who had been wrongly accused at enormous cost to the taxpayer. Sir Keir worked free of charge alongside his close ally Lord Hermer, who is now the Attorney General. So let's talk now to US Marine veteran and trial attorney John Deaton. John, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us on this. So you come at this from both perspectives, actually, as a Marine veteran, but also as a trial attorney. What does it tell us about the Prime Minister if he did do this, well, he did do this pro bono work on this case, even though he says he wasn't representing anybody in it? He was basically part of the team that oversees the protocol of the court cases.
Well, I think he needs to realize what his new job is, and he's no longer this humanitarian rights lawyer. Listen, I was a Marine judge advocate. I actually taught generals in the Marine Corps and admirals in the Navy at the Naval War College the difference between rules of engagement and war crimes. And the Prime Minister's not clarifying the law, he's weaponizing it. It's allowing armchair lawyers 50 years later, not in the battlefield, but in a London courtroom, to second-guess split-second decisions that were made in the 70s or in the 50s. You're bringing back soldiers 50 years later and bringing them into courtroom, second-guessing their behavior made back in the fog of war. It is an insult to the uniform. It is an insult to the rule of law, as far as I'm concerned.
And there have been veterans talking in the UK, John. We've had a few of them on GBNews who would absolutely agree with you and would say that if they had sons and daughters these days, they would not want them to go into the armed forces for that very reason, which is a terrible indictment on the Prime Minister. But he has defended his actions and he's said repeatedly that he supports our troops and he respects the sacrifices that are made. To you, are they just empty words compared to the decisions that he could make in that high office?
Of course there are. There's no reason to repeal this act. Listen, you're basically telling soldiers that your orders that you're given today are only as good as the next election. And imagine if you're a young person, do you want to become a British soldier, knowing that 40 years later, some lawyer may second guess what your orders were back in those days? And you're seeing an exodus from the British military. It really is an assault on the military, and it's going to paralyze British commanders and soldiers from decision making, because they're going to be worried about some armchair lawyer who's probably never served in battle sitting in an air-conditioned London courtroom decades later saying, you know, I think you should have acted different.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver. and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you. Yeah, let's also bring in, if we can, former US Navy SEAL veteran Michael Sarraille. Michael, thank you for joining us again on the show. You were the name that sprung to mind tonight when we were going to discuss this, because you spoke so passionately with me last week about the role of your military in this country. Could you ever imagine a situation in which American soldiers could potentially end up in court to be charged with crimes that had to happen in the heat of the battlefield?
Unfortunately, it has happened, and it wasn't well received by the public. As your previous guest has said, this is morally backwards. It breaks a covenant between soldiers and government. And our belief as we go downrange is that our government has our backs when we make lawful, split-second decisions in some of the worst environments that humans have ever seen. War is not clean. It's not pretty. There is collateral damage. But I assure you, professional militaries like the U.S. military, and especially the Great Britain's military, who I've served alongside, are some of the most professional soldiers. And this will have serious impacts, not only on the current active military within Great Britain, but also the future generations who are watching this live. Why would I serve a country who would prosecute me years down the line?
And this is now adding another layer to that particular narrative, Michael, because as it has now transpired that not only is the Prime Minister overseeing this today in 2026, but back in 2007, he was voluntarily working as a lawyer on the cases which actually triggered and set the precedent for these soldiers to be brought to trial forevermore. And that, Michael, is a very difficult scenario for a sitting Prime Minister to recover from in the eyes of the public.
And to have done it pro bono, alongside solicitor Phil Steiner, who, may I remind you, was convicted for fraud for seeking out and paying Iraqi families to bring these cases to court. So here are the impacts. You have soldiers on active duty who will no longer trust their government. That will lead to retention issues. Additionally, as I said, the future generations are going to watch this, and you're going to see enlistment decline. But the morale will also plummet. But ultimately, this is where Keir Starmer is possibly putting lives at risk. Now think that a troop is going to go downrange, and the fear of being prosecuted will prevent him from pulling the trigger in a situation that is justified and lawful, that may put that soldier's life at risk, or the man or woman to his left and to his right. And that's what bothers me, is being a soldier, you come home with trauma from seeing combat. It's the only amplified and made worse by being prosecuted by the government.
I'm just looking at the wording of this specifically, because the claim being that the Prime Minister did not represent the claimants in this particular case. He represented interveners, including the Law Society of England and Wales, and this article is telling us that the role of an intervener is to assist the court on points of law, not to advocate for either side. Does that make a difference, John, do you think, in terms of the role that the Prime Minister played at this point in history?
No, not at all. It's why I said at the beginning that he needs to accept the role that he's in now. And as the gentleman said, imagine the soldiers coming back with that trauma, with PTSD, spending decades recovering from it, trying to adjust to civilian life outside of that combat scenario, and then be brought back 30, 40 years later, and they're in their 70s or 80s to relive that trauma and be second guessed. The only words that come to mind other than outrage for me is absolute betrayal. Betrayal of the soldier, betrayal of the covenant that the gentleman brought up so eloquently.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. US Marine veteran and trial attorney John Deaton and former US Navy SEAL veteran Michael Sarraille. Downing Street spokesman has said, as the Prime Minister made clear last week, He will never forget the courage, bravery and sacrifice made for their country by British servicemen and women. During his career, the Prime Minister has represented British soldiers who were killed in action and were wrongly accused. They go on, the Prime Minister did not represent the claimants in this case. He represented interveners, including the Law Society of England and Wales. The role of the intervener is to assist the court on points of law, not to advocate for either side. The Prime Minister was not involved in the subsequent case heard in the European Court of Human Rights. Let me